Hello friends, and welcome to Stellar Journeys episode 4, where we blaze a trail from the mid-1900s to the far future. Starting this episode in 1963, we can see an Aero 3 launch vehicle taking off from Kerbal Space Center. The Aero 3 is a direct improvement of the Aero 2G, with an expanded payload bay and 6 SRBs carrying it to orbit. Mounted on this new launcher is Clark 1, a brand new probe whose purpose is to land on the Moon. This will be the KSO's first attempt ever at landing a probe on another celestial body. The Clark 1 probe design went through many iterations, but this one, apparently, was the best. Clark 1 makes it to the Moon without a hitch. Once in low orbit, the sustainer stage breaks the probe and prepares it for the second phase of its mission. Clark 1 is equipped with micrometeorite detectors and radiological experiments to determine the general safety of low lunar flight. Its experiments are done in 2 parts, one in orbit and one on the surface. After about 2 days worth of orbiting, the probe flips around and prepares for a terminal braking burn. The transfer stage uses its last ignition cap to send the probe further towards the Moon's surface. Once the probe has slowed down enough, the transfer stage separates. The landing legs are unpowered except for the final part of their deployment, in which they are mechanically locked with a ratchet mount. About halfway through its descent, the probe's hydrazine engines ignite. Plummeting at 500 meters per second, the thrust provided by the hydrazine engines is barely enough. Regardless, close to midnight, the probe lands successfully on the Moon. A few months later, another Aero 3 is launched. With the second successful flight of an Aero 3 launch vehicle, the KSO decides to retire the Aero 2 series of rockets in favor of the Aero 3's proven reliability. This particular moment in time proves a unique opportunity, as the KSO can send probes both to Duna and Eve due to corresponding transfer windows. This unique opportunity has spurred the KSO to start the Magellan program, not to be confused with the real-life Magellan program. The new series of Magellan probes are orbital study vehicles that use a new way of thinking when it comes to probe design: higher quality materials, more resilient solar panels, and much higher frequency communication dishes. These probes can not only go to the other planets, but once they're there and their missions are complete, they will act as relays for future missions. The journey to Eve will take a better part of a Kerbal year, which should be about 140 days or so. By the end of 1963, the KSO has started purchasing civilian airframe chassis to be used as research planes. Kerbal Douglas has been known for many years to produce very stable and affordable aircraft. The only downside with the aircraft being civilian in frame is that they were rather slow. However, fuel efficiency is paramount, and so they did get the job done. This plane's destination were the westward deserts of Central Kerbin. Outfitted with custom-designed suspension, this plane is capable of landing in multiple different kinds of rough environments. Once landed, the plane would act as a mobile base for about 3 days before taking off again, bound for the KSC. Now, Granted, there won't be very many of these sessions of flying an aircraft in this series just because it does take quite a while and it can get quite boring, and it's also quite difficult to make commentary for this. But I figured that this time it might be a pretty good idea to at least show that we're at least doing some kind of aircraft activities as well as rocketry. It was also around this time where I encountered a little bit of a recording glitch, and Kerbal Space Program does take a considerable amount of time to load, so I wasn't really necessarily going to load it back up post-production and refilm a whole scene of just flying this aircraft from KSC to the deserts. So, pardon for the choppiness, but as you can see here, after a couple hours we land back at KSC, and it's all well and good. By March 2nd, 1964, the rapidly aging Skyhold station needed its first emergency servicing mission. The last crew to work at Skyhold reported that a large chunk of space debris had punctured one of the solar panels, and the station itself was reporting multiple errors with guidance and station keeping. And so the priority of Columbus 2G was pushed to the very next launch window. The original intent of Columbus 2G was to be a test vehicle for a cryogenic service stage. However, as of this flight, it was retrofitted to being a repair vehicle rather than a test vehicle. I mean, the last thing that we want in orbit of Kerbin is a death trap station. The cryogenic service stage did its job well and propelled the spacecraft easily back to the station. It also had plenty of fuel left over, so it will be used for future missions as well. Once the cryogenic stage separates, the monazine power stage ignites. This stage is solely for maneuvering, as there's not enough thrust to really carry anything else besides the spacecraft. Once Columbus 2G arrives at the station, the radar-assisted docking, which has now been available ever since 2 years ago, guides the spacecraft easily into the docking cone. Once docked, the Kerbinauts can go EVA and initiate repairs. The fix on the guidance system was relatively easy and self-explanatory, just a debug line of code in the programming. However, the solar panel was a bit more of an issue. We don't really have the technology to repair solar panels yet. It's still the, I'd say, late-ish 60s, so there's nothing that we really could do. So that only leaves one option, really, for the station. Unfortunately, that is to terminate its mission a little bit earlier than expected. And so with that unfortunate prognosis, the Kerbinauts that are on board Columbus 2G decide to collect any further scientific data that they can and deorbit the spacecraft while they still have air. And again, there was a little bit of a recording glitch, so we don't really get any footage of the retro motors firing, but it's fairly self-explanatory, just 4 kick motors on the back end of the monazine stage. And then once the spacecraft goes low enough into orbit, then the stage separates, and that's that. And on April 1st, 1964, almost as if it's a horrible April Fool's joke, Magellan 1 starts sending data from Eve. The data from Magellan 1 shows that Eve has an extremely dense atmosphere and slightly higher gravity than Kerbin's. After much study, it leads the scientists at KSO to believe that Eve may have one time been exactly like Kerbin. And by June 17th, 1964, another Aero A variant rocket takes off from KSC. Main engine ignition, and Clark 2 takes off from KSC. Also, as you can see, by this point I had finally updated my graphical mods to include solid rocket booster effects, so it should be a lot prettier from now on. Clark 2's mission is identical to Clark 1's mission, except that instead of going to the main craters, it's going to the poles. Once the lander's solar panels deploy, the rocket makes its way towards the moon. This is the second of 5 scheduled Clark program missions before further explorations of the moon continue with more advanced technologies. 2 hours before touchdown, Clark 2 separates from its transfer stage. The engines ignite and the probe slowly descends towards the moon's polar crater. And finally, about 5 days, 4 hours from launch, the probe gently touches down on the surface of the moon's polar crater. Another successful mission paves a bright path for the future missions to the moon. On December 15th, 1964, another Aero 3 launch vehicle takes off from KSC. Several years after our first attempts, we now send another probe to Minmus, this time with full hopes and expectations of finally getting some scientific data from the mysterious little green rock further out from the moon. Everything seems to be going fine, so the crew sits back and waits for data to come in. The probe successfully and automatically makes a stable orbit around Minmus. And finally, KSC sends the order to separate the probe. But wait a minute. Oh. Shucks. Something's wrong. Let's see, hang on a minute. I think I might know the problem. Oh, gosh darn it. Alright. I guess we'll just keep doing what we're doing anyways. That's fine. Doesn't have to separate from it anyways. It's all good. We'll just treat it as if it never happened. Yeah, that'd probably be wiser. We'll just do that. We get information from Minmus, but KSC decides that Minmus might just be cursed, just a little bit. It'll be a little bit of time before we go back there. I don't think anybody wants to. April 10th of 1965 saw the launch of a Javelin 1B from KSC. the payload of this rocket was immediately published to the press as another interplanetary satellite. The designers of the Javelin 1 decided that they should probably work on a new design for a rocket since they were getting kind of tired of seeing the SRBs explode when they separate. Hopefully that design process goes a lot more smoothly than with the original Javelin designs. In the meantime, Magellan 2 ignites its transfer stage engine, on course for Duna. Magellan 2 will not be sending data from the Red Planet for another few months. In the meantime, September 28, 1965, sees the final retirement of Skyhold Station. Mounted aboard a Javelin 1B rocket is a specialized Terminator stage. The Terminator stage is a mostly hollow stage that allows for the station to be destabilized and deorbited from Kerbin. The Terminator automatically navigates itself to the expansion and utility docking system aboard Skyhold. Once connected, the engines on the Terminator stage fire, and the orbit slowly is destabilized. The station served its purpose, and a final farewell to such a great scientific contribution. The orbital path of the deceleration is mapped out to be over one of Kerbin's oceans, so that the remaining debris that does not burn up in the atmosphere can be made into an artificial reef. And so ends the somewhat brief journey of Skyhold Station. For a bit of better news, at the start of the next year, we receive transmissions from Duna. Magellan 2 is connected to KSC, and the order is given to stabilize its orbit high over the Red Planet. The first images come through the television displays, and a plethora of Kerbals at home are astonished. Speculations erupt all over KSC, and future missions are already planned for missions to Duna. Magellan 2's second phase of the mission is to do a flyby observation of Ike, Duna's sole large moon. Scientists immediately discover that Ike is tidally locked with Duna, and it is quite similar to Kerbin's moon. Magellan 2 separates from its cryogenic transfer stage and begins its terminal part of the mission to act as a relay. April 20th, 1966. The Javelin series of rocket receives its next phase upgrade, the Javelin 2. Javelin 2 is rated for 8-ton payloads, and sometimes greater, depending on mission specifications and modifications. This maiden flight has the rocket carrying a test payload in order to ensure future payload safety. Javelin 2, like other launchers, use cryogenic liquid hydrogen. This means that on launch, the emissions are close to zero. It is the KSO's first launch vehicle with environmental risks in mind. This ascent stage features white outer plating, Future missions are proposed to have instead a stripped down version, with orange installation being fully exposed, in order to save cost and weight. The boosters separate as expected, and the main engine cuts off once the payload reaches high enough orbit. There is still liquid fuel in the tank, so engineers and the administration at KSO not only decided this is a successful mission, but a sustainable one as well. Thank you all very much for watching. This has been a wonderful episode to make. I hope to see you all in the next episode, and please, make sure to subscribe and click the bell icon to keep up to date with future episodes. This has been Savius, signing off.